right, numbers guy, where are we at with CCR's penultimate album?
Yeah, so we're 1970s. This is number 51 of the decade, number 10 in 1970, and 212 overall. And according to Rolling Stone, they also made the recent list. They're number 14 with Cosmos Factory.
All right, great. We last talked about CCR back in season 1 of Combing the Stacks. We talked about Green River on episode 14 and Willie and the Poor Boys on episode 11. And if you recall, Willie and the Poor Boys was my number 1 album of the 60s. To recap, CCR had an amazing 1969, 3 top 10 albums, 4 hit singles, but none hitting number 1, with an additional 3 charting B-sides. Can they top that on this album? You'll find out in 1 second. Well, they didn't stop, that's for sure. In January 1970, they released the double A-side Traveling Band Who'll Stop the Rain. And then Traveling Band actually took them to court because it sounded too similar to Little Richard's Good Golly Miss Molly, which I can definitely hear in that opening guitar lick. However, it was settled out of court, so there is no consensus, I guess. Their January 31st show at the Oakland Coliseum was later released as a live album in 1980. They were also featured on the cover of the February 1970 Rolling Stone cover, which I took a look at, and it's basically not that interesting. It's just them on the cover. So no crazy poses or anything like that. John Fogerty wrote Up Around the Bend, which reached number 4 on the singles chart, and Run Through the Jungle was also on that. And he wrote both of those in support of their upcoming European tour. In June of 1970, they went back to Wally Heider Studios in San Francisco to record this album, Cosmo's Factory. The album was released in July of 1970, which this album had their 5th and final number 2 hit, Looking Out My Back Door, Long As I Can See the Light. So, as we said before, they are the only band to have 5 number 2s with no number 1. There are 2 artists that have more number 2s than them with 6. 2 female artists. Care to take any guesses?
That's
Mariah
a good
Carey.
trivia question.
Mariah Carey.
Nope.
Oh,
Give you a couple more guesses.
so it's got to be. So it's either maybe Madonna.
Yep, that's one.
Okay, Janet Jackson.
Nope. The other one is Taylor Swift.
Oh, T Swizzle.
Yep. This album was the biggest seller of their career and spent 9 weeks at number 1 on the album charts. In December of 1970, they released the follow-up album Pendulum, which was another big seller, and had Have You Ever Seen the Rain on it, which was the big hit on that. We will not be talking about that album, though. This ends our discussion of the CCR albums proper, but the story does not stop there. I've got some good stuff. After the recording of Pendulum in early 1971, Tom Fogerty quit the band. Relations between the 3 remaining members was strained, to say the least. John Fogerty started saying that each member would now write and perform their own material, and if they didn't accept that, he would quit the band. They released another album called Mardi Gras after that was critically lambasted, to put it mildly, and did not sell well in April of 1972. And they each, 3 of them, John Fogerty, Stu Cook, and Doug Clifford, each sung their own songs on that album. So
Wait, you said that Fogerty demanded that they all write and sing their own songs?
Yeah, he wanted to take a, quote, more democratic approach to writing the album, because, up to this point he was writing all of the songs. Basically.
I was about to say, wasn't that like a passive aggressive thing where it's I'm churning out like 4 albums in like 12 months. How about you bastards deliver something
let's see what you got.
So,
and then they could stick out and be like, yeah, they're way inferior, because there's no way they were going to write songs as good as he could.
Yeah, and I guess they wanted more artistic input or something, but
that's
probably...
how I always heard that they were bitching for more input, and he's like, Jesus, I'm writing all these goddamn songs. Let's see what you guys can do. Yeah, and that never went away, right? Basically, ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They never reconciled. So at this point, after Mardi Gras was released, Fogerty was against his bandmates and the record label. Stu Cook said that because of Fogerty's poor judgment, they had the worst record deal of any major U.S. artist. And they did a final 2-month tour of the U.S., and the band and label announced the disbanding of CCR on October 16th, 1972. After that, I'll do some wrap-up. All 4 members of the band went solo in the 70s and into the 80s. The owner of their former record label, Fantasy Records, Saul Zaentz, owned the copyrights to all of CCR's songs because Fogerty signed them away to him in 1980 to cancel contractual obligations with the record label. So that's why the songs were heard in so many movies and commercials, which I think we brought up at one point, and all sorts of different things, is because he didn't have the rights, and why not make some money off the songs that you own?
Well, and Fogerty, that infuriated him. I know to this day you can get him going. Yeah.
Wait, but that it surprised. I knew that he didn't have the rights, but it surprises me that he signed them away. And like, it was. What did you say that was? Because again,
remember they were like suing him to not allow him to sell. That was the famous, like, he got sued for sounding too much like himself,
Yes,
but he was basically held.
next.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
I apologize.
No,
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was later though. Wasn't that later? Like,
Yeah.
why did he sell? Why did he
was.
sign it away, even though he hated the dude? Like,
I think, well, one of the things was that the record label demanded like 8 more albums from him, and he refused to do it. So I think that's part of.
and he was still under contract to do all this stuff, and he. Oh, okay, got it. All right, got it. Okay.
So that selling the song catalog basically, I think, fulfilled that instead.
Oh God.
In 1985, with his album. Fogerty also refused to play CCR songs when he was touring solo, which I can only imagine infuriated people going to see Fogerty thinking they were going to see CCR.
Yeah.
I get it. I get it though, because you
too.
write all this stuff and you're like basically beholden, and they screw you, and it's like, I don't even want to think about that era anyway. I hate my former band members. I hate that whole era. I want to do it again. So yeah, I get it, but also, yeah.
He claimed
But that's what the
that he
people
would-
are paying for.
Yeah, he would also claim that he would have to pay royalties since he didn't own the songs. By
Yeah, that
playing
would
them.
suck. Ugh.
In 1985, with his Center Field album, which was his next big hit after CCR, he was in the lawsuit that John mentioned with Saul Zaentz about his song "Old Man Down the Road." Zaentz claimed that it was a rewrite of "Run Through the Jungle" and that Fogerty was plagiarizing himself. so since
Amazing.
Zaentz owned the songs, I guess that's technically could be true. The jury eventually ruled in Fogerty's favor, and Fogerty is still alive today, and he tours and plays CCR songs again because he regained the rights in 2004, which I'll get to in a second.
That's good. I always heard the story. He was for the trial for that. He had to sit there in the jury and play the difference, like for the jury. Like here's this song,
God.
and then this is why they're different.
What a complete farce in some ways.
Yeah.
Tom Fogerty died in 1990 of complications from AIDS, from a tainted blood transfusion during a back surgery that he had.
Jeez.
Cook and Clifford formed Creedence Clearwater Revisited in 1995 after doing solo stuff and working together in the 70s and 80s, and they played CCR songs. Fogerty did not like that and had a court injunction against them, against the name at least, and they briefly changed it to Cosmo's Factory as the band name before the court later ruled in their favor so they continue to tour as that. Fantasy Records released the famous Chronicle Volume 1 compilation in 76, which I think sold a jillion copies and everyone has, and Volume 2 came out in 86. In 2004, Zaentz sold Fantasy Records to Concord Records, and they restored John's ownership rights of the songs back to him, along with a higher royalty rate as a gesture of goodwill to Fogerty. CCR was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993, and Fogerty refused to play with Cook or Clifford on stage. He basically barred them from the stage while Fogerty played with Springsteen and Robbie Robertson covering CCR songs. And
God.
Cook and
It was as
Clifford-
awkward as you think it was too when you watch it.
exactly.
Yeah,
It was
Mhm.
awkward reading it. So
Yeah.
Cook and Clifford were never allowed to play at the ceremony, and they wrote the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame complaining about why did they let that happen. The widow of Tom Fogerty was there also with his ashes, expecting a CCR reunion that didn't happen, and they have yet to reconcile or reunite. And multiple members at this point said it's too late, and that that's it. So.
Yeah, and I even John Fogerty and Tom Fogerty never reconciled either. Like even when Tom Fogerty was on his deathbed and basically like they couldn't work it out.
Yep.
That's
I saw that.
That's
too.
brutal. One of the most brutal stories in rock, man.
I know, considering this is like probably one of the best selling bands, or at least one of the most popular bands of the late 60s, early 70s. It's crazy how it played out. But that's all the bio for them. What did you guys think of Cosmo's Factory? Let's start with John this go round.
So I kind of realized something, guys, as much as I love CCR, and this album really sort of brought it to bear for me. Mm-hmm. Is CCR the best cover band in rock history? Yeah. Because this album is like a cover album of like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, acts from the mid 60s. You know, like every song I listened to, I could see. So, I mean, even like Ooby Dooby, right? Which is an old blues standard. But I mean, when you listen to that song, could you not hear Tutti Frutti? Like immediately, it's almost like a direct rewrite. Mm-hmm. And, so I don't want to say that they, borrowed liberally, but they definitely borrowed liberally here. But they sound so damn good that you're willing to allow them to do it, And this also marks the beginning of longer song CCR. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Which would come, I think it's the next album that has a whole bunch of them. But yeah, this one has 2 long songs off the top of my head that I know. There's like Ramble Tamble at the beginning, and then that I heard it through the grapevine that God bless my buddy Jeff, but that's the song he always picks when he goes to a jukebox. Yeah. Which I always am like, remember I said earlier that Matt would play songs in the car? Yeah. Like, even if you, like, that's a perfect example of, like, that mentality. Because my first take is, as good as that song is, 11 minutes on the jukebox for one song is kind of self-indulgent. There's 2 different types of people. People that think that, right? Or people that are just like, yeah, there you go. Jeff and Matt fall in that other category,
I definitely would.
So, yes. So, it's...
Get my money's worth, man. That's 50 cents. Yes, I got to make it last.
That's his take, too. But yeah, I mean, there's, like, hits all over the place on this. Run Through the Jungle, Up Around the Bend, Who'll Stop the Rain, Looking Out My Back Door, Traveling. I mean, it's like that Chronicle Volume 1, right? It's just like boom, 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 hit, along the way.
Those are all originals for the most part that you listen
but they're originals, but they also sound like Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry. Like, I can't stress enough listening to this album. I was like, I don't know why it never hit me before, but basically CCR's like the perfect synthesis of like early rock and roll and R&B mixed with a little bit of, blues and swamp rock mixed with the guitars plugged in a little bit like they were at the late 60s. And that's the formula that it is. Perhaps no song is more, I actually listened to this album with my father, when I was home for Easter, and his first take on Ramble Tamble was actually exactly what I was thinking. It's like, is there a song that like more encapsulates long song CCR than Ramble Tamble? It's like, that's a long song CCR, and then Up Around the Bend is like short song CCR. So if you want to hear like what short song CCR and long song CCR sounds like, there you go. There isn't much deviation from the albums we did before, but CCR is one of the few bands that can keep doing the same thing over and over again. It still sounds so damn good, which is an art in its own right, because you still want to hear it. Even that's why that what is Chronicle? Is it 20 songs Chronicle? I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and volume 1, and then volume 2 is the same thing, basically.
It's the same thing, 20 and yet you can listen to that and not get tired of it, which is remarkable. So I really enjoyed this album. They're not reinventing the wheel, though, and like as I listened to this, it was like, all I could think of was like in their time, I'm sure they were somewhat polarizing in their time for some people, because the people that are looking for like authenticity and originality probably didn't love CCR because they were probably a little bit like bubblegum, I would guess. But they're damn good bubblegum. And listening to it 50 years later without having to refight the battles it's great. So strong thumbs up. But I would say CCR is the greatest cover band in rock history. Is how I'm going to start describing them now.
All right, Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, that's you guys know how I feel about CCR. I would say I was kind of thinking about this too, John, in a little bit of a different context, but I think that CCR might be, if I was to like list, somebody used to list like quote unquote baby boomer groups, right? Like bands that like are define that generation, or bands that a ton of people from that generation really love. To me, this is the best of the bunch, and this might be my favorite. I know this is in the 70s, and they had a couple albums in the 70s. CCR to me is still a 60s band, but I think I would go so far, on a personal note, I would go so far as to say outside of Beatles and the Dylan, CCR is my favorite band from that era. And I just love them so much. And everything you said, John, is absolutely correct. It's like the same note that they hit. It's the same style. They don't deviate from it. The biggest deviations that you might get, you do hear in this record with a longer jam out song like I Heard It Through the Grapevine, right? Like that's where they deviate from the formula. But
he even does that same like that Y sound in like different songs, in like every single song at nearly the exact same place in the song every single time.
And that brings me to my next point, which is, because I agree with you, a lot of the stuff you listen to, it's stuff that has been done before. It's stuff that's like basic. It's like blues, it's with a little bit of a unique kind of, guitar tone or sound. But the thing,
a lot of R&B too. A lot of R&B.
Right. And the thing that stands out to me the most is his voice. Like John Fogerty's voice I love it so much. He's got it's like a perfect combination of like a scream and like a crooning, like actual song, like voice, it really bridges both of those. He doesn't go full blown either way. It does probably sound like a lot of times more of like a screaming type, because it's a raspier kind of a sound, but he just marriages that so well. And it fits what they are doing so perfectly. And to me, it's the defining sound of Creedence, is Fogerty's voice.
And he does the same, like we said, that Y sound at the thing, like, throwing, like not pronouncing fully all of the words. Like that, whoo, it's like some variation of that, like some variation
New York
of that
lady. Yeah.
Yeah. Some variation of that, like, whoo, is in every single song at different points, either like drawn out or like belted right at the thing. And there's also always that like guitar part that's like sometimes goes into a very, very short solo, and sometimes goes into like you think it's going to be the very short solo, and then they rein it back in and it goes right back into like the next, bridge or chorus or wherever it's going. So I don't know if I could think of a band that does the same thing so often that I don't get worn out on.
You never get sick of this.
Yeah. And even their long songs are not self-indulgent like many baby boomer acts were known to do. I tell you,
I love the long songs in here. I Heard It Through the Grapevine. They could play that for another 11 minutes and 5 seconds. Like they are so good with what they're doing there. And Ramble Tamble, I never heard that song until this week. And what
really?
And that was just like, holy crap, that was like this revelation. Yeah. There's another gem out there that I didn't know about, and I love how where it starts off and then it goes into this jam where they're really in it.
Slows down.
Yeah, and there's like different effects that they're doing, and then they bring it back to what the original song was. So that was a big treat for me. And I would also like to see My Baby Left Me is also very much, it sounds exactly like That's All Right, that Elvis song. I think that, and I know that the Beatles covered it. It's one of those songs that's like Surfing in the USA is the same thing as Sweet Little 16. It's like the same song with different lyrics, and it's like, that's Surfing USA, but no, it's Sweet Little 16. It's the same thing with My Baby Left Me. And
that's what I'm saying. They're the world's best cover band, because everything they play kind of sounds like Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, the early Beach Boys, at sometimes the Beatles, like parts of the Beatles, Little Richard, and that's what I'm saying. Like, you normally hate a band that did that or say they're derivative, but they somehow managed to escape that. So
Yep. And so I'll just before I kick it to Josh, I think this is going to easily make my top 10 of the decade.
Really?
Already, I think it's going to be hard to unseat this. You know what I mean? Like, I love Creedence so much. I will never get sick of them. And I love this record. Like you said, John, it's just a banger. It's one hit after another. It's one just awesome song after another, and it's a tight record too, even for the long songs.
I will say though that I have to dock it for not sounding different than the other albums, and as much as I like CCR's sound, there's so much stuff in the 70s that's tracking. I do have to take a few points off for never deviating from the
That's
formula
fair.
a little bit.
That's fair. But I love the formula so much, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they put out 3 albums in '69, so it's not like they are necessarily progressing as artists. It's all the songs are almost all interchangeable between the albums.
It's just volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, and volume 4. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, and when you think about it, I talked about how short the run of T-Rex was from 70 to 73, and CCR's run is from like 69 to 71. So it's like a full year less than the Burn Bright of T-Rex, which is remarkable in its own right. So,
what about you, Josh?
I loved it as well. I was trying to figure out if this album's better than Willie and the Poor Boys and if I liked it more. It's remarkable for the fact that it's like half covers and half originals, but it just still rocks so hard. I love songs like Up Around the Bend. They just make you want to get up and cheer because they just are so catchy, and everybody knows CCR songs at this point, or should, and would recognize at least 1 or 2 of these songs, if not more. I think Long As I Can See the Light is a perfect song to end an album on. That was another the album construction was interesting. I thought it was interesting that they started off with a long song to open the record, like Ramble Tamble, another song that I wasn't as familiar with, I hadn't heard in a while. Matt, you were right that the My Baby Left Me actually was covered by Elvis at one point. And we've got other covers on here by the Bo Diddley covers Before You Accuse Me, which Eric Clapton's also covered a lot.
Oh, right, yeah.
Ooby Dooby's actually a Roy Orbison cover.
Yep.
And then I Heard It Through the Grapevine was covered by multiple people, including the Miracles.
And see, that's why I can't put Cosmo's Factory like in the top, like Matt said, definitely in my top 10. I do like when an album's like half covers, and I love it, but like when I'm talking that level of rarefied
well,
air.
it's 4 covers and 11 songs. It's not. I mean, it's not that much covers, but
like, are the Beatles if they're releasing their first 5 albums back and just stop there? Yeah,
no,
the Beatles because of the rest of their career,
and,
right?
And that's fair. And again, when I say that, it's more of the personal thing. It's just for a record that I just get so much. I get just as much enjoyment from the covers as I do from the originals. So even though I know that they are covers, the sound is quintessentially CCR, and it all rolls into one for me.
Yeah, I agree. That was my complaint against some of the early Beatles records when we would discuss those, that the covers weren't as good, but I think their covers here are really good. And they seem to know how to bring their own spin to it, and Fogerty is just a damn good writer for these songs. I can't get over that. Sure, they may sound similar to one another, but he's cranking out the hits at like an incredible rate. So, I mean, that's just a testament to his artistic ability.
Playing devil's advocate, though, and it's funny because I love CCR, but like it's part of the reason he's a great writer, because he's just doing small spins on established stuff. I think that's probably the knock on CCR, right? And why they're not looked at in that rarefied air the rest of the bands are, because it's like, okay, John Fogerty just takes the edges of what stuff's. It's like the argument about Billy Joel, right? That basically his entire career is just rewrites of better artists, right? And I'm not going to say that CCR is not a better artist than some of the stuff they're covering, but when you listen to I Heard It Through the Grapevine, like my first thought was, how good were the songwriters from Motown? Because I've heard that like 8 times by 8 different people, and it's like awesome every single way that everybody always does it. So I mean, I think that's my only thing is like, I don't know how much original there is here compared to even their stuff, or even in terms of what they're doing. When you watch like T-Rex create a genre, right? And then you listen to this, there is a difference in terms of degree of difficulty, isn't there? But then there's also a degree of difficulty of writing as many songs that even if they're derivative or hits, like they do.
But it doesn't have to be. It's not an either or. It's not like, well, in order for it to be. I mean, for me, I get when you're making a best ever list of all time, you definitely have to give a lot of points for originality, for pushing the envelope, for creating a genre, absolutely. But if I'm just sitting there and I'm looking at, Electric Warrior and Cosmo's Factory, 9 times out of 10, I would rather listen to Cosmo's Factory as just an enjoyment of something that I just like, right? Like more so than anything else that I've heard 1,000 times before and I've never gotten sick of. I would rather listen to this.
I don't disagree, but what did Cosmos Factory what did CCR ultimately influence? It's a good question, isn't it? Because T-Rex, I can give you 50,000. Yeah.
Right, but go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, I think they just zigged when other people zagged. They turned away from the folk, and they found this area that wasn't being explored in that like old swamp rock, blues rock, and they just did it better than anybody else at that time.
Yeah, they took like a formula that was, and they covered, and they took, even if the songs that they weren't covering, it was still all very within the same realm, and they just made their sound, their distinct sound, was particularly with Fogerty's voice. And just every time I hear a song, I just want to groove. And yeah, I don't know, John. That is a good question. Who did they really influence?
Well,
I don't know, but it also doesn't take away like my just pure enjoyment of it, and the fact that when I hear Creedence, I go, I freaking love this band. I will never get sick of them. And but I would also say, like, I don't know, maybe they were the biggest band that was doing something like this, because it, like Josh said, it is like that blues rock, that soul that they're doing, but they never really went totally like in the psychedelic way. They never went in the really experimental way. It was very much grounded in like an Americana roots kind of, thing, along with the blues and the soul. And it's Creedence. It's their own thing.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I can't say the albums aren't great, but I feel like part of a review show, right? We're listening to all these albums, right? So there has to be some contextualization along the way. And I think it's like, I like Creedence. Creedence writes good songs. Yes, this is true, but it's like in the context of the larger thing, I think it should be noted also that, they come from a clear place, and they didn't necessarily take music to where it was going either. That's not a knock on them, but I mean, even when John Fogerty was writing Center Field, he was just writing like updated Creedence songs, right? In 1985 later. Mm-hmm. So that's my only, it's kind of like the Ramones, right? But like everybody jokes that the Ramones wrote the same song over and over again, but like everybody says that, you know what I mean? And everybody knows, and then people took the Ramones template and exploded it, right? And that's kind of like, it's just interesting that CCR didn't have like something that followed it, right? Like the Ramones did with punk. So I hate to be the person who, does, because I really enjoyed this album, but
John, you hate Creedence. Just say it.
I like CCR, but I feel the academic part of the show needs to at least push back on the narrative.
I think that's fair, right? And if you're looking at the grand scheme of things, yes, that is a fair point. I will say the other thing I figured out was in The Big Lebowski, I know what tape he had in the car, because two of the songs from that he was listening to were on this. He must have had Cosmos Factory playing in there, because he's got Run Through the Jungle and Looking Out My Back Door were on playing it through his car. But
yeah, still strong recommend for me.
Yeah,
even with all that being said. Yeah,
same.
No, that's a good point, John.